Hannah, you've talked about some of the reasons that you think Putin launched an invasion of this scale. And you've also argued that we need to take into account the national and imperial dimensions of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, and that the resistance that the Ukrainians are putting up is most analogous to anti-colonial struggles. Could you elaborate on that?
So now Ukrainian fascism is anti-colonial.
Russia launched this invasion.
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
This was an interesting conversation that was taking place on another fucking whack liberal channel, Democracy Now!, that used to at least have some good content, but they're complete psyop now of progressivism promoting imperialism. And it's called Two Voices from Russia and Ukraine. And it's basically promoting these people who are parroting imperialist talking points about Russia. So I just want to play this and we'll comment on this, them talking about what's going on.
Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. We turn now to the war in Ukraine. Air raid sirens were heard across parts of Ukraine today as Russia launched a fourth day of missile strikes targeting multiple Ukrainian cities and towns. Many of the strikes have targeted Ukraine's electricity system, leaving many areas without power. Ukrainian officials said some of the Russian attacks near Kyiv were carried out by Iranian-made drones. This comes as Western leaders are vowing to provide more arms to Ukraine as well as new air defense systems. Russia escalated its attack on Ukraine after a massive explosion Saturday damaged a key bridge connecting Russia to occupied Crimea. Meanwhile, at the United Nations, the General Assembly has voted 143-5 to condemn Russia's annexation of 4 territories seized from Ukraine. The 4 countries joining Russia were Belarus, Nicaragua, North Korea, and Syria. This is Linda Thomas.
Amazing countries.
US Ambassador to the United Nations.
The United Nations will not tolerate attempts at illegal annexation. We will never recognize it. These United Nations will not tolerate seizing a neighbor's land by force. We will stand up to it. These United Nations will not tolerate the destruction of the UN Charter.
35 nations, including China and India, abstained from the UN vote condemning Russia's annexation. This is Jin Shuang, China's Deputy UN Ambassador.
We have always believed that any action taken by the General Assembly should be conducive to the de-escalation of the situation, should be conducive to the early resumption of dialogue, and should be conducive to the promotion of a political...
What was it like for
I'm going to fast forward to the part where she interviews this quote-unquote leftist Ukrainian activist and is repeating some of these talking points.
Born and raised in Donetsk, eastern Ukraine, and speaks both Russian and Ukrainian. Hannah, let's begin with you. You were in Moscow doing your academic studies right before Russia invaded Ukraine, and you grew up in Donetsk, in the occupied region of Ukraine, where this vote just took place that the vast majority of countries in the world just condemned at the United Nations. Can you talk about the significance of both? What was it like to grow up there? What do you understand about that vote? And to be in Russia right before the invasion?
Okay, thanks for having me. Well, it's a little bit difficult question, but yes, being a Ukrainian born in Donetsk and having all my family in Donetsk, actually the war started for me not this.
It's always some random Ukrainian in fucking Switzerland, by the way. It's never like somebody actually over there.
Year, but 8 years ago. And and my circle of friends and my family were affected by the war when the Russia started in 2014. And being in Moscow just before, I was there for my academic research, and my academic research is in a big part of it is about the Russian imperial and national ideology. So being a historian and working on Russian contemporary imperialism and also in a Russian imperialism in historic perspective, I was kind of more prepared, I think, for the invasion than most of the people who were kind of very surprised by it.
Hannah, you've talked about some of the reasons that you think Putin launched an invasion of this scale. And you've also argued that we need to take into account the national and imperial dimensions of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, and that the resistance that the Ukrainians are putting up is most analogous to anti-colonial struggles. Could you elaborate on that?
So now Ukrainian fascism is anti-colonial.
Russia launched this invasion.
Well, yes. For me, one of the dimensions of Russian contemporary imperialist ideology is that it is driven by the resentment of a fallen empire, and what is important, by a resentment of a nationalizing empire. Actually, the national narrative of Ukraine and that of Russia are in a total contradiction in this sense. Ukraine as a political community can only survive outside of Russia because Russia denies its right to exist, while for Russian nationalist elites, their nation is incomplete, if not impossible, without Ukraine within it. So these two narratives are kind of mutually exclusive, and this kind of nationalizing empires like Russia, today's Russia, are very dangerous, because in the current Russian perspective, Ukrainians must recognize that they are Russians, otherwise they must be destroyed. And this is not a marginal discourse, this is something you hear every day on the Russian state TV channels. So yeah, it's a state that invades another independent state, protagonizes war crimes at a huge scale, and at the same time holds a discourse and practices that can be qualified as an incitation to genocide, because there are, for example, numerous cases when children are separated from their Ukrainian families, sent to Russia and adopted there. But I want to emphasize that, of course, history is important, but it cannot fully explain the reasons of this invasion, because history is a source of discourses and practices, but in order to influence the reality, these discourses must be reactivated. And the invasion of Ukraine is not some kind of a historical inertia. The ideology of Putin is a product of, past 2 centuries, but Putin's political regime that reactivates these ideas is a product of the past 30, 20 years.
What a fucking idiot. She had the nose ring and everything, the hipster sweater, using language like anti-colonial. Now she's describing Ukrainian fascism as an anti-colonial movement, talking about Russia denying the right of you. It just doesn't make sense, even from a logistical point of view. Like, this is the thing that boggles my mind. And this is, Comrade, what you and I, this is the importance of actually studying Marxism. This is why it bothers me when people downplay the importance of studying and reading, especially political theory and ideology, because if you have a dialectical materialist understanding of current events in history, you understand that the economic base determines the superstructure, that changes in modes and means of production and resources and all of these things and class struggle determine world events. It's not some ideas in one person's mind, right? What they call the great man theory. It's not this Russian drive to wipe out all nationalism. That's not the driving force of things. The driving force of things in society is economics, is the class struggles or the modes and means of production. It's not these random ideas in people's heads. Like, they act like Putin just woke up one day and was like, I want to kill all Ukrainians, ha ha ha, for no reason. It just logistically, it doesn't make sense, right? So, what is your response to a lot of these kind of like liberal types who promote this language, this leftist sounding language of anti-colonialism and national self-determination and all this to support Ukrainian fascism?
Yeah, that video, I mean, Democracy Now! We're aware of at this point. For years, it's been promoting U.S. and imperialist propaganda, a lot of regime change operations around the world. But that video, honestly, was something else. I mean, when they said that Ukraine's resistance is reminiscent or related to anti-colonial struggle, I mean, what the hell are they? I mean, we know what they're doing there. They're trying to use leftist, left-sounding ideas that appeal to people who would generally be anti-war, anti-interventionists, who should be if they're leftists, but they're using that to try and support imperialism. And it's the complete opposite. This Ukrainian nationalism, it's not some anti-colonial movement. In fact, it's been utilized, it was cultivated and utilized consistently by the Western colonial powers, Nazi Germany during World War II, leading up to World War II and during World War II. Then after that, the United States, the UK, the NATO countries. These are the Western colonial powers who propped this up with all of their might. And now they're doing with everything they've got. And they somehow, these clowns, I don't understand how, because these people who work at Democracy Now!, I imagine at some point they must have been like anti-war and lefty of some sort of thing. But it's like, how do you like get to the point where you're saying stuff like that Ukrainian resistance, basically referring to Ukrainian nationalism, is an anti-colonial movement? I mean, there you go. You got the picture right there with the Ukrainian resistance to Russia, that quote unquote, that was going on in the 1940s, where they had swastikas. I mean, they've got the swastikas today. Democracy Now! Doesn't want to show you that, but it's insane. It's on another level. And this is what they do, and what you often cover on your program. And I think on your first show, I was lucky enough, I was very honored to be your guest. We were talking
Number one, hell yeah.
Yeah, about Syria and how when Biden first came in, he was trying to put like diverse faces for imperialism and stuff. And this is what they do, and you've done a great job exposing, is this sort of woke washing of imperialism. And that's what they're doing here exactly. They're trying to like link it to, I mean, to compare. It's so insane to say that these Ukrainian Nazis, who are fully backed by the Western colonial powers, to try and link it to the anti-colonial struggles that fought against the Western imperialists. I mean, it's so insane. I mean, I can't stop saying it, but it's on another level. Then you look at the sort of things that that the guest was saying there. I mean, this ideology of Putin that she's talking about, what ideology? I mean, if you look at what they promote in Russia, it's sort of a Russian patriotism, and it's actually very inclusive. If you look at it, if you look at Russian film and stuff promoted these days, especially around the Second World War, you'll notice that it's Russian patriotism and sort of a Soviet patriotism, but it's not Russian nationalism. It's absolutely not. And a lot of these, it's funny because the liberals and these sort of like white nationalists who look to Russia, they have this same idea of Russia, which is completely false. They have this idea that Russia is like this nationalist stronghold of this ethno-state and blah, blah, blah. But if you look at actually Russian media and like films and stuff, they go out of their way to portray not just the Russian people, but the people from Central Asia, the people from the Caucasus, the Muslim populations, the various populations who came together to defeat Nazi Germany. And they make it clear that it wasn't just Russians, it was the people from the vast territories of the former Soviet Union, Eurasia, all of the nationalities who look so many different ways, who came together to defeat the Nazis. So when they talk about this imperial ideology and all this nonsense. It's like, okay, give me the examples. What are you referring to? All they could point to is the sort of Russian and Soviet pride in defending the country from Western aggression, and that's a fact. I mean, look, Napoleon tried to invade. Then in the Russian Civil War, you had so many countries, including the United States, invade Soviet Russia on the side of the Tsarist forces against the Bolsheviks. France, UK, all these Western powers invaded Soviet Russia at the time. Then in the Second World War, Nazi Germany, not just Nazi Germany, basically the first, it's funny, a lot of liberals and establishment people think it's a crazy thing to compare NATO to the Nazis, but actually the Nazis were sort of the first iteration of NATO, if you think about it, because what did Hitler do when he invaded the Soviet Union? He created a European alliance of countries to invade the Soviet Union, an anti-communist European alliance. And it wasn't just Germans that invaded the Soviet Union. It was fascist Italy, it was Finland, it was Hungary, it was a bunch of these, Romania, a bunch of these European satellite states of the Nazis that invaded the Soviet Union. And so NATO picked up the pieces from there and tried to create a second European, Euro-American alliance against the Soviets, and of course picked up a lot of these Nazis who were very well known. A lot of the leaders of NATO were in the German military and were Nazis. So it's a continuation of that. But yeah, it's really unfortunate that democracy now is doing this sort of thing, but it's not a surprise because we saw it in Syria, Libya, even in Bolivia, a case where it's like so blatant and so blatantly, so much blatant racism. That coup that happened, they were promoting propaganda there to support the coup, and it was Trump as president, which is another funny thing because they want to act like they're so against Trump and everything, but they're supporting Trump's foreign policy. So it's democracy now. It's really unfortunate, but it is what it is.